everyone, and welcome once again to Economy and World, the space where we stop to observe what others simply overlook. In recent days, you have most likely felt overwhelmed by the constant stream of news that seems to draw a map of chaos. Military tensions in the Persian Gulf, troop movements along the border of Eastern Europe, and a deafening diplomatic clash between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. It is very easy, and even understandable, to remain on the surface of these events, interpreting them as simple power struggles or ideological differences. However, to truly understand where your well-being and the value of your assets are heading, you must learn to see the invisible thread that connects all these points: money control over energy and the financial architecture that supports our daily lives. What we are experiencing is not an isolated crisis, but a deliberate dismantling of globalization as we have known it for the past 30 years. You may remember a time when absolute priority was given to efficiency. The world sought to produce wherever it was cheapest, regardless of distance or the color of the flag. That model is now over. Today, the major powers have decided that security matters more than profitability. This transition, which may seem distant and highly technical, is the main reason why life feels more expensive and the future more uncertain. This is not only inflation. It is the cost of a world that is breaking into rival blocks. And to understand why this fracture is taking place, we must first examine the central role of energy. The situation in Iran can be seen not only as a diplomatic dispute, but as a struggle for control of the global energy tap. Iran is not merely an inconvenient neighbor for the West. It is one of the countries with the greatest potential to export oil and gas in the world. Every time Washington tightens sanctions or a strategic negotiation collapses, financial markets automatically add a risk premium. Governments do not pay this surcharge. You do, every time you fill your car with fuel or turn on your heating. But here lies the key question that almost no one mentions. The United States has become, in recent years, a net exporter of energy. Instability in the Middle East and the blocking of Russian energy supplies in Europe have allowed American gas and oil to take a privileged position in the global market. On this new chessboard, high energy prices are not a problem for everyone. They are a tool of influence and a guaranteed source of income for those who now control supply. As a consequence of this energy shift, a financial phenomenon is emerging that you should watch very closely: a structural rise in uncertainty. Major capital managers are no longer concerned only about normal economic recessions, but about diplomatic decisions that can wipe out an entire supply chain in a matter of days. This explains why global money is seeking refuge in very specific assets, not because exceptional growth is expected, but because geopolitical risk has become the primary variable in the valuation of any investment. When you see peripheral stock markets fall, or the dollar strengthen despite domestic problems, you are witnessing a flight to safety. Capital is afraid, and fear always looks for the shelter of those who possess the military power to back their currency. However, this attempt by Washington to reshape the global balance in favor of its commercial interests is facing organized resistance in what is now known as the Moscow-Beijing axis. You must understand that the coordination between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping is not merely a military partnership. It is an effort to build a parallel financial architecture that does not depend on the dollar. Every energy contract signed in yuan or rubles, and every new bilateral payment system that bypasses the traditional Wall Street circuit, represents a crack in the hegemony that has dominated the world since 1945. This process of de-dollarization is slow and discreet, but it is the deepest transformation of our time. For you, this means that the world is no longer speaking a single financial language, and that fragmentation will inevitably make trade slower and more expensive. This fragmentation is especially harsh in Europe, which today stands as one of the most vulnerable players on the international stage. The continent does not control its own energy security and depends on decisions taken thousands of kilometers away to preserve its stability. The massive increase in military spending, driven by the war in Ukraine, and the need to rearm against new threats, carries what economists call an enormous opportunity cost. You know very well that money is limited. Every euro a government spends today on missiles or armored vehicles is a euro not invested in healthcare, technological innovation, or the pensions of those who worked their entire lives. Europe is accepting relative impoverishment in exchange for a form of security that can no longer be guaranteed through trade. In this context, the situation in Ukraine acts as a powerful accelerator of these trends. Beyond the human tragedy, the prolonged conflict keeps a critical share of the region's agricultural and industrial production out of the global market. This ensures that pressure on commodity prices remains constant. In addition, the massive financial support flowing from the West to the battlefield does not come from surplus wealth, but from rising public debt and widening deficits. You should be aware that this level of strain on public finances will sooner or later translate into fiscal adjustments or into a further erosion of your currency's purchasing power. However, the most insidious factor in this new world order is the psychological effect it has on private investment. When you and companies perceive that the environment is unstable and that the rules can change at any moment, the natural reaction is caution. Projects are postponed, international expansion is reduced, and liquidity is prioritized over growth. This defensive attitude does not cause a sudden collapse that makes headlines, but rather a slow and persistent erosion of economic dynamism. It is a world that innovates more slowly because it is too busy building walls. This is the silent economic consequence of geopolitics. A more fragmented world grows less, distributes benefits more poorly, and is, by definition, more unstable. Even technology, which for decades was the great engine of global integration, is now suffering from this division. Control over advanced semiconductors, digital infrastructure, and satellite networks has become the new battlefield. Technological fragmentation forces major powers to duplicate development efforts and restrict the export of critical components, which makes innovation more expensive and slows its diffusion. For you, this means that the advances that could improve your quality of life will arrive later and at a higher cost, simply because knowledge is no longer shared and has become a strategic weapon. This block-based logic is also making debt more expensive. When investors believe that a country may be affected by sanctions or trade disruptions, they demand higher interest rates to lend money to it. This particularly affects medium and small economies in Latin America, which are caught in a perfect storm: a strong dollar that makes their debts more expensive, and an environment of uncertainty that discourages productive capital inflows. The result is growing pressure on public finances, which limits the ability of these countries to invest in their own development, and widens the gap between the powerful blocs and the rest of the world. It is essential that you understand that this transition from a system based on interdependence to one based on security is a conscious decision by the major powers. They are willing to accept economic losses and lower global efficiency in exchange for greater political and strategic control. For the nations that dominate the board, this trade-off may seem manageable, but for the ordinary citizen, it represents a much harsher and more expensive phase. The world you once knew, where predictability was the norm, is giving way to an environment in which volatility is the only constant. Ultimately, what we are witnessing with Iran, Russia, China, and the United States is not a crisis that will be solved with a simple treaty. It is the birth of a new economic reality, in which the value of things is no longer measured only by their price, but by their availability and their security. The real risk for us is not a single, immediate explosion, but a gradual and silent impoverishment. Companies pay more to produce, governments pay more to finance themselves, and you pay more to consume. That is the bill that geopolitics is presenting to us right now. This silent erosion has a much deeper root that you need to understand: the end of the peace dividend. For decades, the world saved trillions of dollars because it did not need to prepare for a major conflict. That money was used to finance welfare systems, pensions, and consumption. Today, that money is being absorbed by the defense industry. You must understand that when a government announces a massive increase in military spending, it is not creating wealth. It is shifting resources away from the productive economy toward an economy of attrition. This is the first major reason why your standard of living feels stagnant. Resources that once improved your city or your hospital are now being used to build systems that, in the best case, will never be used, and in the worst case, will be destroyed on a battlefield. This shift in priorities leads directly to the great dilemma of reindustrialization. You will hear politicians speak enthusiastically about bringing factories back home, but they will rarely explain the price you will have to pay for it. Manufacturing a phone, a car, or a medicine in Western countries is far more expensive than producing it in the Asian manufacturing hubs we have relied on for years. We are living through what I call patriotic inflation. It is a process in which society voluntarily accepts higher-priced products in exchange for not depending on a geopolitical rival. For people who live on fixed income or on their savings, as many of you do, this inflation is not a statistic, it is a direct loss of economic freedom. You are paying, without realizing it, the cost of a trade war that is being fought on the price tags of the products you buy every day. But the problem does not end with manufacturing. It extends to the energy that powers those factories. You have seen how we have been pushed toward an accelerated green transition. What is rarely explained is that this transition is not only an environmental objective, but also a tool of geopolitical competition. By trying to disconnect from the oil and gas of certain blocks, Western countries are attempting to rewrite the rules of the energy game. However, this transition requires critical minerals, such as lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, which are largely controlled by China. You therefore find yourself in a paradox. In order to reduce dependence on a rival for fossil energy, the system is forcing you to depend on another rival for technological energy. This bottleneck ensures that energy will remain expensive and volatile, directly affecting your long-term ability to save. This is where we must stop and examine the state of global public debt, a subject that should deeply concern you. For years, interest rates were close to 0%, which allowed governments to borrow on a massive scale without feeling the burden of interest payments. But in this new world of blocks and friction, money is no longer free. You must understand that when interest rates rise and remain high, debt servicing, meaning the interest that the state pays to its creditors, begins to consume a larger share of the national budget than even education or defense. We are reaching a point at which the social contract is being tested. Who will be paid first? International bondholders or retirees waiting for their pensions? This is the uncomfortable question that current politics avoids answering, but that financial markets are already beginning to price in. This financial fragility is made even worse by the complete digitalization of our money. You have moved from using cash and coins to depending on a digital account that exists only on distant servers. In a world of total interdependence, this was efficient. But in a world of rival blocks, your digital money is vulnerable to cyber attacks, financial blockades, and systemic failures. You have seen how entire countries can be disconnected from the SWIFT system in a matter of hours. What was once a tool of financial order has now become a weapon of war. This forces us to rethink what wealth really is. Is it a number on a screen that can be frozen by a political decision? Or is it something tangible that you can touch and use independently of the system? This question is driving the return of gold and physical assets as the only true refuge for those who understand that the rules of the game have changed forever. You should also pay close attention to the role of the countries that do not want to choose sides, the so-called Global South. Nations such as India, Brazil, and countries in Southeast Asia are playing both sides, buying cheap energy from one bloc and selling technology to the other. This economic arbitrage is allowing them to grow, while the traditional powers wear themselves down in their struggle for hegemony. For you, this means that the center of gravity of the world is shifting. It is not a fast process, but it is unstoppable. Investment opportunities and wealth flows are no longer directed only toward the transatlantic axis. You now live in a world where your local currency can lose strength, not because your country is doing things badly, but because the rest of the world is finding new ways to trade without passing through the traditional toll gates of the West. All of this leads us to a conclusion that you must internalize in order to protect your future. The model of infinite growth based on debt and cheap energy has come to an end. What comes next is an economy of resilience. An economy in which adaptability and practical knowledge will be worth more than stock market speculation. You, who witnessed how the world transformed with the arrival of the internet and globalization, must now witness its retreat. It is not the end of the world, but it is the end of an era of certainty. The new reality will be more local, more hands-on, and far more selective. You must also be aware that the system will try to maintain the illusion of normality for as long as possible through propaganda and temporary monetary stimulus. But the cracks in infrastructure, the rising cost of basic services, and the instability of pension systems are warning signs that you cannot ignore. Geopolitics is no longer something that happens in other countries. It now shows up on your electricity bill, in the price of your bread, and in the security of your bank savings. The situation with Iran, the sanctions on Russia, and the rivalry with China are simply the sparks that are accelerating a process of deterioration that was already embedded in the financial system. For this reason, at Economy and World, we insist that you must diversify the way you look at reality. Do not limit yourself to accumulating figures. Accumulate resilience. Learn to identify which part of your wealth depends on the goodwill of a system that is now under historic strain. You have the advantage of experience, a tool that allows you to distinguish between passing noise and structural change. The world is fragmenting, yes, but that fragmentation also creates opportunities for those who know how to read the map before the walls are fully built. Ultimately, the true value in this century will not be how much money you have, but how much freedom that money can buy you in an environment of growing control. Energy control, technological control, and financial control are the three chains being used to tie down the New World Order. You can choose to be a passive observer of this process, or you can decide to take control of your own household economy by simplifying your dependencies and strengthening your real assets. We have reached the end of our brief analysis from our point of view. Thank you for being with us, and remember that at Economy and World, our priority is to closely monitor how wealth moves so that you are always one step ahead. If this content has given you a new perspective, do not forget to subscribe and share it with those who want to understand the reality behind the headlines. Stay calm, watch the data, and above all, strengthen your personal ability to respond. See you in the next video.